A very warm welcome to everyone who's gathered and joined this session that we've organized. We hope that you will, we trust you'll find this a very stimulating and critical and thoughtful discussion. Uh, I am from Partners for Law in Development, a legal resource organization in India working on gender justice issues broadly. And Partners for Law in Development is the secretariat for a national coalition advocating for adolescent concerns. We have mm, we came together in 2019 in the backdrop of government proposals to change the child marriage law. And so I'll give a little bit of context of why the coalition came together and what who are its constituents. There are 22 members in this national coalition. We represent different sectors: child rights, women's rights, sexual reproductive health, disability issues, as well as public health concerns. And the reason for coming together is really to grapple with the proposals that have been put on the table since 2019, one of which is to make all underage marriages void, that is to withdraw legal recognition from them. The law as of now makes them makes it possible to prevent and prosecute underage marriages, but once they occur, they are valid. So the change that is being proposed is in line with a global trend, which is to treat all these marriages as void ab initio or completely lacking legal validity. The second change that we heard of last year, a proposal by the government, was to increase the minimum age of marriage from 18 years for girls to 21 years. And this, therefore, in a sense, changes the debate on child marriage to one of underage marriage, because until early adulthood, women would have no right to marry or make personal decisions if such a change was indeed acted upon. Many of us got together to see what the evidence from our different domains of work showed. How would this impact young people? And so as part of that process, we consolidated our different research pieces, our experiences, to come up with a position. And not only this coalition, but civil society groups and academics from across the countries, pulled together the information and the data they had. And most importantly, this process also involved young voices from across the country to actually engage on the policy issues of child marriage. So 100 organizations under the umbrella of Young Voices came together and talked to 2,500 young people to consolidate their views, and they presented to the government task force. Their representative is with us today, and we will hear her.
सभी का शुक्रिया मुझे इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे अपनी बात रखने का अवसर दिया। मेरा नाम ममता है और मैं अजमेर डिस्ट्रिक्ट के साकरिया गांव राजस्थान से हूँ और मैं महिला जन अधिकार समिति के साथ जुड़कर मैंने अपना बाल विवाह रुकवाया। महिला जन अधिकार समिति के साथ मैं लगभग 3000 लड़कियों के साथ लगातार जुड़ती रहती हूँ। महिला जन अधिकार समिति जो है मध्य राजस्थान में 3 जिलों में काम करती है, जिसमें 60 गांव और 10 कच्ची शहरी बस्तियों में काम करती है। हमारे जैसे जो लड़कियां हैं वो स्वास्थ्य पे, प्रजनन स्वास्थ्य पे, हिंसा पे, शिक्षा, सुरक्षा, भेदभाव, गरीबी और इन सब चीजों के जो बीच में जो हमारे खुद के जो सपने हैं और हमारी क्या चाहत है, हमारी क्या उम्मीदें हैं, जिनको पूरा करने के अवसर बिल्कुल भी नहीं मिलते हैं। और हमको थोड़ा बहुत जो लड़कियां हैं हमको सोशल मीडिया और स्कूल के जरिए जो हम जागरूक जानकार बनते हैं और जागरूक जानकार बनकर हमारा हक पाना चाहते हैं, हक पाना चाहते हैं, जो अभी और भी मुश्किल होता जा रहा है। और एक तरफ से जो समाज भी हमको उसी रीति रिवाज, कानून और समाज के जो नियम है उसमें बांधे रखता है, पर साथ ही सरकार भी हमारे लिए कोई मतलब ग्रामीण लेवल पे कोई ठोस प्रयास नहीं कर रही है कि लड़कियां आगे बढ़े, उनके अवसर मिले, वो अपने सपने पूरे करें, पर कैसे करें। पिछले कई दिनों से लगातार यही बात चलती आ रही है कि सरकार कई तरह की घोषणाएं कर रही है, जैसे कि बाल विवाह को अवैध घोषित कर रही है और लड़कियों की उम्र जो है वो 18 से 21 कर रही है। पर जैसे मधु मैम ने भी बताया था कि हमने 2500 पूरे भारत देश की 16 संस्थाओं ने मिलकर 2500 लड़कियों से लगातार बातचीत करी, तो हम उस चीज से यही निकला कि बातचीत से यही चीज निकली कि जो 2500 लड़कियां हैं, हम सबका कहना है कि ये कानून आ तो रहा है पर इससे हमको फायदा बिल्कुल भी नहीं है, और हमारे जीवन में इस चीज का क्या बदलाव आएगा और ये किस तरीके से हमारे व हमारे समुदाय में किस तरीके से लागू होगा और इसका क्या चीज निकलेगी, वो हमको बिल्कुल भी इसका फायदा नहीं लग रहा है, क्योंकि ये हमारे आने वाले समय में हमारी जिंदगी को और ज्यादा जटिल और कठिन बनाने वाला जो कानून आने वाला है। सरकार का इस चीज पे क्या सोचना और क्या क्या विचार है, मतलब हम सबका ये सवाल है कि सरकार इस चीज पे क्या सोच रही है, कानून तो ला रही है पर हमारे हमारे फायदे के लिए क्या सोच रही है, कि हम कब शादी करें, कब नहीं करें, किससे करें, क्यों करें, हम पसंद की शादी करें या ना करें। तो इस चीज के लिए सरकार हमको क्या मदद करेगी, क्योंकि आए दिन हम भी देखते हैं, हमारे माँ बाप भी देखते हैं कि जिस तरह के जो कानून आए जा रहे हैं और जो पसंद की शादी कर रहे हैं, मतलब पसंद की शादी कर रहे हैं कुछ लोग, तो अगर उनका पता चल जाता है तो या तो वो आत्महत्या कर लेते हैं खुद ही, या फिर उनको मार दिया जाता है, क्योंकि हमारा समाज जो है वो चाइल्ड मतलब पसंद की शादी को एक्सेप्ट नहीं कर पा रहा है। तो जिस तरह के जो और ये जो कानून आ रहा है वो हमको और जटिल कठिन और है ना हमको दंड देने का जैसा कानून बन रहा है लगातार। तो मतलब और कोविड में तो इस चीज के मतलब लड़कियों के हालात बहुत ज्यादा गंभीर हो गए हैं, बहुत ज्यादा कठिन हालात हो गए हैं। जैसे हम भी देखते हैं, हम भी गांव में रहते हैं, तो हम इन चीजों को नोटिस भी करते हैं कि जो लड़कियों के पास जो पहले अवसर थे वो बहुत ज्यादा सीमित होते जा रहे हैं अभी। और मतलब और सरकार बोलती है कि मतलब लड़कियां पढ़ नहीं रही, मतलब लड़कियों का चाइल्ड मैरिज हो जाता है इसलिए उनको पढ़ा नहीं रहे हैं। पर हम जो लोग देखते हैं ज्यादातर कि मतलब लड़कियों का शादी इसलिए नहीं हो रहा है कि वो पढ़ नहीं रही, पर ना मतलब क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ पे स्कूल ही नहीं है, जैसे कहीं पे 5वीं तक स्कूल है, 8वीं तक स्कूल है, तो हमको आगे पढ़ने के लिए घर वाले भेजते ही नहीं है, क्योंकि बाहर का माहौल जो है वो इतना हिंसा हिंसा से भरा हुआ है कि हम लोग ठीक से आ जा भी नहीं पाते हैं और ठीक से अपनी बात भी नहीं रख पाते हैं घर में, क्योंकि छेड़छाड़ इतनी सब होती है, तो घर वालों को भी उनकी इज्जत का जो है वो रखता है कि मतलब हमारी इज्जत खराब हो जाएगी इस टाइप से। तो हम चाहते हैं कि सरकार हमारे लिए, अगर सरकार को कुछ करना है तो हमारे लिए अच्छे जॉब हो, अच्छे अवसर हो, क्योंकि आज हम भी बाहर रहते हैं गांव से, तो हमारे गांव के आसपास जिस तरह का माहौल है उससे हमारे घर वाले पसंद नहीं करते कि हम बाहर जाएं। तो हमारे गांव के, हमारे क्षेत्र के आसपास छोटे छोटे रोजगार है, क्योंकि रोजगार है, कुछ रोजगार है, जो सिलाई सेंटर है, ब्यूटी पार्लर है, जो क्या करता है वो हमको पुराने ही रीति रिवाज और पुराने ही जो परंपरा से ढली चीजें आ रही है उसी में ढकेल रहा है। तो कुछ नया इनिशिएटिव नहीं है और कुछ नया रोजगार, नया हुनर हमारे लिए नहीं है कि हम सीख के हमारे सपनों को पूरा कर पाए, हम अच्छे से हमारी बात रख पाए, हमारे हमारे जो चाहत और हमारी पसंद की चीजें हैं वो हम कर पाए। और जो चीजें हैं कि अच्छे रोजगार नहीं है और हम मतलब इतना सारा कि स्कूल अच्छे नहीं है, और प्राइवेट जो इंस्टीट्यूट है, प्राइवेट स्कूल कॉलेज जो है उसमें इतनी सारी फीस है कि हम कहाँ से उस फीस को भर पाएंगे, क्योंकि अगर हम पढ़ाई के साथ वो काम भी करें तो
2 minutes.
काम इतना अच्छा है नहीं कि हम उसके साथ पैसे भी कमा पाए, और पैसे बहुत कम है हमारे पढ़ाई के साथ साथ अगर हम काम करें तो हमारा सबसे पहले सरकार को ये कहना है कि सरकार अपना काम करे, हमको एक अच्छा जॉब दे, अच्छी एजुकेशन दे। जो हमारी एजुकेशन में जो चीजें हैं, जो हेल्थ हेल्थ को लेकर है, एजुकेशन को लेकर है, क्योंकि कहीं पे टीचर है तो वो अच्छे से पढ़ा नहीं पा रहे हैं, टीचर्स में कॉन्फिडेंस नहीं है कि वो हमको माहवारी के जो सत्र है, सेशन है, वो अच्छे से पढ़ा पाए। जो सैनिटरी पैड है कहीं पे दे रहे हैं, मिल रहे हैं, अच्छी क्वालिटी के नहीं है, और कई स्कूलों में तो बहुत ज्यादा मतलब हालत खराब है, मतलब शौचालय तक नहीं है। लड़कियां अगर पेड यूज कर रही है सैनिटरी पैड तो उसको कहाँ पे उनको कहाँ पे डिस्पोज करें, और शौचालय में पानी नहीं है तो उनपे ताले लगे हुए, क्योंकि साफ सफाई करने की व्यवस्था ही नहीं है। तो इससे इन चीजों की जो लड़कियों को समस्याओं का जो सामना फेस करना पड़ता है, तो इसकी वजह से भी घर वाले काफी, क्योंकि उनका भी इज्जत का सवाल जुड़ा रहता है, तो घर वाले हमको भेजते ही नहीं है स्कूल ज्यादातर, और धीरे धीरे लड़कियों की स्कूल छूटी जाती है। तो हम मतलब सरकार से ये डिमांड करते हैं कि हमारे लिए अच्छा जॉब हो, अच्छी अपॉर्चुनिटी हो, कि हम हमारे सपनों को पूरा कर पाए और अच्छा एजुकेशन हमको मिले। क्योंकि हम आज जिस तरह के माहौल में हम देखते हैं, पले बड़े भी रहते हैं, तो वो माहौल इतना अच्छा नहीं है कि हम अपने आप को वहाँ पे डेवलप कर पाए। और साथ ही सरकार को जो 21 और 25 का जो चक्कर है ना, उसमें ना पड़ के हमारे जॉब के बारे में सोचना चाहिए, हमारे यूथ जो है उसका एजुकेशन और उसके विकास के बारे में सोचना चाहिए। और हमारा तो यही कहना है कि मतलब सरकार जो है ये जो जैसा दंड देने वाला जो कानून ला रही है, हमने कई सारे गांव में जाकर बड़े लोगों से भी बात करी कि इस तरह का कानून आ रहा है, तो लोग यही बोलते हैं कि नहीं, ये चीज गलत है, क्योंकि लड़कियों को जो है उनके बॉडी लैंग्वेज से आंका जाता है, उनको ये नहीं देखा जाता है कि ये अभी छोटी है या कैसी है। क्योंकि और ये डिसीजन हमारा है ना, सरकार को मिनिमम एज रखनी चाहिए 18, जो ठीक है। इसके बाद जो एज है वो हम हमारे पे निर्णय सोचना चाहिए ना जी, क्योंकि हम जब वोट दे सकते हैं 18 की उम्र में, तो हम हमारा डिसीजन क्यों नहीं ले सकते।
थैंक यू मधु। जैसे आपने बताया, विशाखा पिछले 30 साल से महिलाओं और लड़कियों के मसलों पर काम कर रही है, और वर्तमान में हम एक बड़े कार्यक्रम के तहत ट्राइबल गर्ल्स के साथ लगभग 100 गाँव में सीधे तौर पे काम कर रहे हैं। जब हम लड़कियों के मसलों को लड़कियों के साथ मिलकर और लड़कियों की नजर से देखते हैं, तो साफ समझ में आता है कि शादी की जो उम्र है, और खासतौर से जो कानूनी उम्र है, उस कम उम्र की शादियों को शून्य करना या उनके सजा के प्रावधानों को बढ़ाना, या लड़कियों के लिए ये चीजें लड़कियों के लिए एक ऑप्शन की तरह, एक हल की तरह से काम नहीं करते, बल्कि ऐसा करके हम लड़कियों की मुश्किलों को बढ़ाते हैं और इस मसले की जो पेचीदगियां हैं उनको बहुत सीमित नजर से देखने की भूल करते हैं। अपनी बात के समर्थन में कुछ बातें कहना चाहूंगा। जब महिला एवं बाल विकास विभाग की तरफ से हमें शादी की उम्र बढ़ाने का प्रस्ताव आया, और हमने तो उस समय में हमने कई युवा लड़कों और लड़कियों के साथ बातचीत की। इन युवा लड़के लड़कियों ने अपने गांव में पिछले 2 सालों में 20 वर्ष से कम उम्र की जो शादियां थी उनको उनको उन शादियों को और उनके कारणों को नक्शे पे उतारा, और देखा कि हर शादी के अलग अलग कारण थे। कहीं एक साथ 3 बेटियों की शादी पर खर्च बचाना था, तो कहीं भाई की एवज में बहन की शादी करना था, तो कहीं पर सगाई वाले लड़के का काम पर पलायन पे चले जाना, और कहीं पे ससुराल वालों को बच्चों की जल्दी है, तो अलग अलग तरह के कारण निकल के आए। और इनमें वो शादियां भी शामिल थी जो लड़कों और लड़कियों ने अपनी पसंद से करी थी, और इसके चलते उनको अपने घर छोड़कर चले जाना या भाग जाना पड़ा था। इन नक्शों के विश्लेषण में लड़कियों ने ही ये बात उठाई कि स्थितियां और शादी के कारण बहुत अलग अलग हैं, और उनको सिर्फ एक कानून से कैसे हल किया जा सकता है, जो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात है। शादी एक पेचीदा व्यक्तिगत सामाजिक फैसला है, और इसे पूरी तरह से पितृसत्तात्मक, जातिगत और सामाजिक नियम संचालित करते हैं, जहाँ लड़कियों को और कुछ हद तक लड़कों पर भी कड़ा नियंत्रण है, और उसमें उनकी चाहतों का, चुनाव का, निर्णय का या सम्मान का कोई जगह नहीं, लगभग नहीं के बराबर होती है। हमारे कार्य क्षेत्र में अगर हम बचपन में तय हुई शादियों से इनकार कर देते हैं, उनके माँ बाप इनकार कर दें, लड़कियां इनकार कर दें, तो उनको आर्थिक दंड चुकाना पड़ता है। 6 साल पहले इस इलाके के एक गांव में एक लड़की ने अपनी मर्जी से शादी करी, और वो अपने शादी करके चली गई, और जब वापस वो 8 साल बाद अपने बच्चे को लेकर लौटी, तो इज्जत के नाम पर उसको जिंदा जला दिया गया। और इस पूरी घटना की रोक टोक के लिए कानूनी प्रावधान और कानूनी संरक्षण कुछ भी नहीं कर पाए। मसला साफ है कि जब एक लड़की अपनी पसंद से शादी करती है, तो उसके आसपास की 10 लड़कियों का स्कूल आना बंद हो जाता है, और एक साफ सामाजिक संदेश जाता है कि कोई भी लड़की ऐसा करेगी तो उसका यही हाल होगा। हमारा मकसद क्या है एक्चुअली? हमारा मकसद लड़कियों पर से नियंत्रण को खोलना, उन्हें स्वतंत्र, स्वायत्त और जीवन के लिए सक्षम बनाना है ना। तो फिर हमको उसके कई पहलुओं पे काम करना पड़ेगा, सिर्फ कानूनी बात पे नहीं जा सकते। इसको एक उदाहरण से देखें तो जब हम लड़कियां शादी के कारणों में सुरक्षा की कमी को एक बड़ा कारण की तरह से देखती हैं, और जिससे उनके अवसर, उनकी मोबिलिटी, उनकी डिग्निटी सभी इम्पैक्ट में आती हैं। हम पिछले सालों से हम कमर काठी की प्रक्रिया कर रहे हैं। ये एक एम्पावरमेंट की प्रक्रिया है जो 8 चरणों में होती है। यहाँ पे हम लड़कियों के साथ शर्म झिझक कर गहरी बातचीत करते हैं, महिलावादी नजर से उनको एक सेल्फ डिफेंस की ट्रेनिंग पे लेके जाते हैं, शर्म, सुरक्षा और लड़कियों और माओ के साथ संवाद स्थापित करते हैं, स्थानीय पुलिस के साथ विजिट कराते हैं, कानून व्यवस्था पर समझ बनाते हैं, और उसके बाद लड़कियां अपने गांव की सुरक्षा की ऑडिट करती हैं, उसका प्रस्ताव बनाती हैं, ग्राम पंचायत देती हैं और उसके फॉलो अप करती हैं। इस पूरी प्रक्रिया का वो निरंतर फॉलो अप करती हैं, और उस तो आप देख रहे हैं कि ये कमरकाठी जैसी प्रक्रिया एक बहुत बहुआयामी प्रक्रिया है, सशक्तिकरण आधारित प्रक्रिया है। इसके चलते बहुत सारी लड़कियां अपने ऊपर होने वाली हिंसा का सामना कर पाई हैं, लेकिन फिर भी कुछ लड़कियां हैं जो हिंसा की स्थितियों से उबर नहीं पाई। ये बताता है कि पितृसत्ता की जकड़न इस कदर मजबूत है कि बहुत आयामों पर काम करने के बाद भी इन स्थितियों से निकलने के लिए गहराई का बहुत, तो ये कि कानून होने से हल जाते हैं, बल्कि जैसा हम लगातार समझ में आ रहा है कि कानून लड़कियों की मर्जी को दबाने के लिए इस्तेमाल किया जाता है। पिछले दिनों अगर हम पेंडेमिक के दौरान एक छोटा सर्वे जो विशाखा ने किया था उसकी बात करें, तो 298 गर्ल्स के साथ हमने जब बातचीत करी, तो उसमें से 61 गर्ल्स ने बताया कि उनके फोन छीन लिए गए और सिम बंद कर दी गई, जबकि ये कामकाजी लड़कियां हैं जो 10-12 साल की उम्र से घर की आमदनी को बढ़ाने के लिए कामकाज करती हैं, घर से बाहर निकलती हैं, नियमित जाती हैं। तो इतनी छोटी चीजों पर नहीं है, और इस सिचुएशन का मुकाबला करने के लिए कोई कानूनी संरक्षण प्रावधान भी नहीं है, और है भी तो वो बहुत इफेक्टिव नहीं होते, कारगर नहीं होते। दरअसल शादी लड़कियों की दोयम दर्जे की स्थिति को बनाए रखने का एक जरिया बनी रहती है। लड़कियां मजदूरी करें, पैसा कमाएं, या वो दोनों काम करें, लेकिन उनकी जो सोशल आइडेंटिटी है वो बदलती नहीं है, वो कुल मिला के शारीरिक और यौन मजदूरी की तरह से ही दिखाई देती है। इस भूमिका को निभाने के
2
लिए उनको अपनी
minutes.
सोच, पसंद या मौके तलाशने का कोई अवसर नहीं दिया जाता। शादी की कानूनन उम्र को बढ़ाने पर ये प्रस्ताव की जो प्रमुख खामी है जो अभी अभी सरकार लेना चाह रही है, वो लड़कियों के लिए शादी और सामाजिक भूमिकाओं का कोई विकल्प खड़ा नहीं करती, और वो ऐसे हालात नहीं बनाती कि लड़कियां बाहर निकल के दुनिया के साथ जुड़े और उनके लिए कोई अवसर निर्मित हो। दूसरी तरफ हमारे यहाँ पर जब सेंटर पे लड़कियां आती हैं, SRHR सेंटर पे, और वो जब कभी वो अनवांटेड प्रेगनेंसी को हटाना चाहती हैं, तो उनकी फिक्र ये होती है कि अगर घर वालों को पता लग गया तो उनकी शादी जबरदस्ती करा दी जाएगी। माने शादी उनके लिए एक सजा भी है और उनके लिए एक नई जिंदगी का टिकट भी है। इस डिलेमा को समझना पड़ेगा, और शादी की जो अनिवार्यता है उस शिक्षा, रोजगार, स्वास्थ्य, इन सब पहुंचने के व्यवस्थाएं हैं, संस्थान हैं, मार्गदर्शक सहयोग और संरक्षण की जरूरतें हैं, संवैधानिक हक है, किंतु शादी की उम्र बढ़ाने जैसे कानून इस पेचीदा संदर्भ की जरूरतों को पूरा शायद नहीं कर सकते। और हम जब स्वास्थ्य व्यवस्था की बात करें, तो जब SRHR सेंटर पे लड़कियां इन इन संदर्भों से निकलती हैं और बात करती हैं, तो शायद वो स्टिग्मा, जो अबॉर्शन का जो स्टिग्मा है, उसके ऊपर धीमी आवाज में बात करते हुए एक छोटा डेंट डाल पाती हैं और शादी के दबाव को कम कर पाती हैं। हमारी एक कोalition की एक और संस्था सदस्य मासूम भी इन मसलों पर काम कर रही है, और उनकी सीख भी लगभग इस तरह की निकलती है, और वे 8वीं पास करने वाली लड़कियों के साथ शैक्षणिक फेलोशिप दे रहे हैं, खेल का इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, वॉलीबॉल ट्रेनिंग्स कर रहे हैं, और समुदाय में माता पिताओं के साथ संवाद कर रहे हैं, जिसका उनके ऊपर एक महत्वपूर्ण फर्क पड़ रहा है। कुल मिलाकर मैं ये कहना चाहूंगा कि इस तरह अपने शरीर पर, स्वास्थ्य पर नियंत्रण लेने और नए उद्देश्यों को साकार करने के लिए हाइपर लोकल सॉल्यूशंस जो एम्पावरमेंट बेस्ड हों, उनको वो तलाशने होंगे, और लड़कियों की हिम्मत और स्वतंत्रता कम करने वाला एक कानूनी उपक्रम इस तक पहुंचने में असक्षम होगा। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Madhu, and thank you, PLD, for creating this important space for conversations on early child and forced marriage. We call it CEFM nowadays. Today I'll be arguing that the laws are not enough to address a complex issue of CEFM, and my arguments are primarily based on the experiences and voices of young girls from the field, especially from marginalized community, as Madhu just shared. And if we see in the context of India, underage marriage rates have already fallen over a period of time. But since we still have world's largest population, of girls married under 18, this is still a big concern for a lot of us, but also I understand for an international community which is looking at sheer numbers that we have. And this is also important to say that this is despite a law prohibiting their marriage before 18. So clearly, laws have failed to be an effective tool to reduce early marriage in the absence of other enabling factors. Because all marriages, including early and child marriage, is a deeply patriarchal practice rooted in the gender and sexual hierarchy and control of the society. In India, marriages are not just marriages where two people want to live together or want to have a life together. It is a very important tool of maintaining and reinforcing the caste, class, religious purity as well as hierarchy. Thus, it cannot be addressed without engaging with these structures and institutions of patriarchy governing actually the choices and decisions of marriage that are taken for young people by the society, where they have hardly any say in majority of the cases. Whereas in a political environment, we also see a very different kind of process happening at the moment. The state is also concerned about how young people are making their choices. There is already a regressive law which is assuming that there is some kind of a organized war is happening on converting Hindu girls into Islam, and a term is called love jihad is used, and the state actually is trying to bring laws to control that. So when we look at laws like this, we clearly can see state is not interested or invested in creating enabling environment for young people, but actually controlling and curbing their autonomy and freedom. So while all governments claim to empower young people, and we hear this language a lot, but the policies and practices on ground speak otherwise. The political environment, I would say, this is true maybe for a lot of other countries, not just for India. And globally, there is a push towards regressive ideologies where a lot of changes, especially in laws, are happening to control actually what people have gained autonomy and what otherwise free choices they were making. So again, laws are not really empowering young people. It is actually empowering state to have more and more regressive ways of controlling their choices and desires, which is again is something which is rooted in a patriarchal way a state is functioning in majority of the cases. In addition to the gender and sexuality, early marriage is also driven by a complex set of socio-economic inequalities, as well as lack of opportunities that majority of girls, I mean, Bharat just talked about it, but not just girls, I guess boys also, where they are unable to build their own lives and take their life decisions. So marriage as an institution, as we all know, also controls productive and reproductive labor in addition to sexuality and choices as per the needs of the community and households. While we recognize gender and sexuality based choices and the social control around them, the questions on labor and reproductive labor of girls and its role in early and child marriage is yet to be articulated and addressed within CEFM. So any intervention in this area has to engage with all the lived social economic complexities, including labor and work from gender perspective as they inform decisions around girls' life and marriage. Evidence from research grassroots practices also show us that education is a very empowering and powerful deterrent to early and child marriage. However, it is not just that we keep girls in school and it will automatically happen. These are intertwined relationships between education and early marriage, which are embedded with the intersecting and dynamic social and economic relations. So just having them in school is not enough unless we are also giving them choices. We are building their skills. We are creating a supportive environments where they are able to decide and earn their livelihoods and have a say in their own life's decisions. So all I'm trying to say that a lot of time we think education is a panacea, but the state of education as we see now has also not done enough. Like laws, education also need to not just limit itself to giving access to institutions, which is equally important, but also think of a transformative ways in which education can empower girls. So if we really want young people to be the decision makers, and we have to make them decision makers because they can only resist their own marriages and decide whether they want to marry or not marry, at what age and how. We have to create enabling environment by creating supportive infrastructures, by giving access to education, life skills education, new technical knowledge that is important to be relevant in today's world. And unless we are investing in all of these spheres and creating that kind of enabling environment, just making laws is not enough. And that is actually maybe backfiring on a lot of things, as we are hearing from other people also, and not really empowering. So thank you very much.
I will try my best to highlight the contradictions because there are plenty, but probably focus on a few. My presentation largely is around the way in which in recent times we are witnessing morality becoming the guiding source for law while rights have taken a backseat. And as previous speakers have reiterated, that law has not really been an answer to the problem of child marriage. But the fact is that there is a law that exists, and therefore it allows the authorities the freedom to use it according to their whims and fancies rather than when it is really needed. And the last focus point would be the fact that there is complete ignorance of children's agency, their evolving capacities, their right to be heard, as well as age-appropriate response to their situations in the current legal and policy framework. So if we look at the two situations, one being where a child marriage is arranged and solemnized by the family, probably against the wishes of the child, and the second situation being where a minor gets into a romantic relationship and that results in underage marriage. If we examine the first situation, we refer to the law on child marriage, which is the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act enacted in 2006. And it replaced the earlier law of 1929 with a hope to curb child marriages and punish the offenders. There was greater severity of punishment introduced. However, the law has been far from social reality. It has received little acceptance, and I'll just cite one example, which is where the law provides for seeking injunction to prevent a child marriage from taking place. And an injunction can be sought from the courts, but that is rarely used. Instead, people resort and prefer and resort to informal ways of dealing with such situations where, informal undertakings are taken from parents that they will not get their daughter married till she attains the age of majority. But these undertakings are also flouted because they don't have a legal binding. What has worked instead has been civil society initiatives directed at empowering adolescents, both boys and girls, raising awareness, and to an extent, the conditional cash transfer schemes of the government of India, where girls get a certain amount of money if they continue to be in the education system, complete 18 years, and delay their marriage up to the age of 18 years. That's when they get a huge sum of money. I won't get into the criticism of that scheme, but the fact is that it has played a role in delaying the age of marriage. Another element of the law, child marriage law, is regarding void and voidability of child marriage. some child marriages are null and void, which is where marriages are forced by use of enticement or deceit or kidnapping or trafficking, or it is against an injunction order. But by and large, marriages remain voidable. And there is an option for the girl and the boy in the marriage to get the marriage annulled, which can be exercised within 2 years from the time they attain majority. Since minors are unable to exercise this option, unless their parents or guardians support them, because they don't have the legal capacity to enter into a contract with a lawyer and file a case in the court. Often this provision doesn't really get used. Also, the law allows them to exercise this option, as I said, within 2 years of attaining majority. But this is a rarity because, there is very little awareness of such provisions. Besides, the sacredness and sanctity associated with the institution of marriage and its preservation do not allow social acceptance for nullifying a marriage as easily as we would think or like to think. Even lawyers and courts, unfortunately, are really not aware of provisions regarding annulment and often suggest, the parties to go for divorce rather than seeking annulment. So that's another big problem. In other words, this provision too remains unimplemented. And the third critical aspect of the law is that it makes child marriage a punishable offense, even for those who participate in a child marriage, fully knowing that it is about children. Now, if we look at data, the 2011 census, which is what unfortunately we have to rely on, reports that about 12.1 million girls and boys got married before their legal age. And the fourth National Family Health Survey 2015 talks about 26.8% women in the 20 to 24 year age group being married before the age of 18 years. Now, if you look at the crime data, we only have 525 cases registered under the law, which means that the law is not being really used. There are studies by partners in for law in development, which also shows that when the law is used to book a case, it is largely because parents have not been happy with their children exercising their choice. In 65% of the 83 verdicts that PLD has studied, they found this. There's other data which now brings us to the second situation where girls and boys are exercising their choices. This is where a lot of data from studies conducted by the Center for Child and the Law, National Law University, Bangalore, as well as HUC, Center for Child Rights, Forum Against Child Sexual Exploitation, and UNICEF, shows that a lot of the cases, nearly 25%, are cases which are booked for sexual offenses against children are actually cases of romantic relationships. Clearly, there's another set of data, statistics, which tells us that a lot of cases are being booked for kidnapping of minors for marriage. The 2019 data tells us about 15,000 such cases were recorded. But if you look at the police disposal of these cases, which is police investigation, then you find that about 48.4% of the cases where the police have completed their investigation are cases where final reports had to be filed and the cases had to be closed for reasons like cases being false or mistake of fact or insufficient evidence, which again points to the fact that a lot of these cases are being booked because the law has allowed for such contradiction, where on one hand, child marriage, if not stopped, continues to be valid. And on the other hand, because young people are entering into consensual sex, they are penalized for it, because the POCSO Act says sexual activity with a minor under the age of 18 years is a statutory offense. In other words, I would say child marriage has today become statutory rape. So that's a huge problem that we are grappling with. And there is a judgment of the Supreme Court in Independent Thought, versus Union of India, where again, this interpretation has been reiterated, which actually then equates the age of consent with age of marriage, creating more problems for children, for young people, for adolescents who are otherwise meant to be protected under the law. And much of this is happening in the name of child protection laws, in the name of protecting children, in the name of having a uniform law that deals with all children, without recognizing their agency and their evolving capacities. Now, maturity is a word which has come to be used very loosely and according to convenience. So, when it suits the lawmakers, suddenly you attribute maturity to young people. And when it doesn't, you take it away, you take away that capacity from them completely. And that's been a big worry. I would say that, it's time that we recognize entitlements of young people, treat them as individuals with rights, listen to what they have to say, and probably, we need to demystify, or rather fully understand the principle of best interest of children. There has to be a guidance note, a guidance policy as to how do you reconcile with situations where marriages are forced and
Time's
where
up.
they are consensual.
જે આપ્યા એ પૈસા આપ્યા પછી અમે પાછા બહાર જ રહેતીલા, મજૂરી કરતીલા. દાવ ભાંગ્યા પછી મારા પપ્પાએ પાછી વિજય પર ફરિયાદ કરી હું તે વર્ષ ત્યારે હું 18 વર્ષથી નાની હતી એટલે મારા પપ્પાએ ફરિયાદ કરી અને ખોટો ગુનો લગાડીને ફરિયાદ કરી. મારા પપ્પાએ મારા કાકાએ બધા ગામના લોકોએ બધે ખૂબ મારી મને દોરડા બાંધીથી રસીથી. તઈ 10 એક દિવસ રાખી પછી વેચી દીધી 1,25,000 માં.
So this is the story of Anita. And Anita is a tribal girl. Customarily in tribal communities, you see that girls choosing their own partners was accepted. And yet in this video, as we saw, Nalini, just keep moving. The question really that Bharti and all of us have been asking is, are we going to decide or define child marriage by age alone or by the agency of the youth in this matter? And is consent a factor to be considered? And what is customarily now, even in earlier times, was accepted, now is actually being not only criminalized by custom, but also by the law, which is where it's becoming really, really dangerous. Bharti just move, and as Bharti was also speaking about data and research. This is only data from 3 districts of Gujarat over 3 years, and India has 741 districts. So this is less than 0.05. And the numbers are just astounding. After 2012, where the laws brought down the age of consent from 18 to 16, what essentially happened was that we started criminalizing all romantic relationships, activities of adolescents. And this is the scale of a study we've done very quickly. We studied about 731 police records on rape and kidnap of children between the ages of 14 and 18. And we also did in-depth interviews because these girls were also seeking us out for help for the child line that we ran. And Nalini next. So, interestingly, you will see the people who are protecting the child. Customarily, Anita talks of her father and the brother, her uncles beating her up, tying up, and then selling her because she chose to run away. And we see in the complainants across these districts, because these are like the three districts are representative of different populations. They are socially and economically backward castes, the tribals, and there's also the denotified communities. And we see that in these relationships, most of these cases come from these communities in rural areas, extremely poor informal labor, agriculture labor, and the relationship between the complainant and the survivor is astoundingly, it is the fathers who are setting out to complain, and then the mothers, and the self. In a very few cases, we've seen that the girls themselves, under immense pressure from parents, also become complainants. And only in a few cases you do actually have kidnapping and rape and abduction, which is really serious, because all the serious cases of kidnapping and rape of children, which need due attention and all the seriousness that we need to attend with it, get subsumed under this large number of cases which are filed by parents
Two
on the
minutes.
boys that the girl has run away. And it's really, go to the next slide, Mrinalini, and if you see the distribution um, of cases, when did you file this case? And it's always between 3 to 15 days, 16 to 60 days, so long they take the case to file. And it's the custom is that you actually then figure out, oh, the girl has run away. And in 97 of this percent of these cases, the accused is named. So you already know who the girl has run away with. Okay. And then you're arbitrating with that family, putting pressure on them, asking for compensation, asking for penalty, asking for the girls to be brought back. And in case in the tribal areas, they probably just ask for a penalty and monetary compensation. In non-tribal societies and caste-based societies in India, they also forcibly uh, kill the girl, or even, you know, sell her off somewhere because they don't want a marriage outside community. And when we were doing this study with the girls who eloped, we also did a mobility tool looking at what were the girls allowed. And these are all girls under the age of 18. And we found that, 41% had dropped out from secondary school. The pressure on paid and unpaid domestic work was making their days 13 to 14 hours, like rural women. 58.6% weren't allowed to meet their friends, and 80% had never been to a cinema hall, 82% had never been to a market alone. They had no access to sports or leisure apart from school. So you really look at this kind of an opportunity that a young rural girl has from a marginalized community, and you have escape what Bharat spoke about early. It's like a double bind. You want to escape this reality and set up your own life, and you're also putting yourself at further risk because, go to the next slide, Niralini. You're running away with the boy, and the boy is now also legally going to be culpable of rape and is going to go to jail for 7 years and more. You and the boy have, Anita talks about Vijay having paid 1.62 to compensate the parents over a lakh. And where does this money come from? These young couples are running from door to door, hiding from the violence that they face back in their village. And then they are getting into bonded labor situations. And the girl who's run away with the boy also doesn't know him too well. And you also,
Anita.
probably exchange glances and just known each other. So this whole set of consequences that are happening on the girls. Next slide, Mrinalini. Also, actually, the fear of being sent back to her parents is so high that just over last year, and this is in just one block, not only a district, we have thousands of blocks in this country. This is where we have a very high community engagement. And just during lockdown and post the lockdown, we've seen 20 cases in just one block of unnatural, I hate to use a word, but more commonly known as honor killings, where these young couples have been hung. and 15 cases of violence, and this is a very small sample of the people that we directly engage with in one block. We ourselves work in 8 or 10 blocks, and the numbers are just astounding because they're from a tribal community where there's much more acceptance of girls getting into relationships of their choice. Traditionally, in the festivals of Holi, the girls were allowed to go and explore their relationships, and it was customarily accepted. So even there's a huge on backlash, even in communities where this practice wasn't there.
Sejal,
On
I must
only
ask you
girls,
to wrap up.
yeah, on the girls exhibiting agency. I think just the last few slides you can flash, Mrinalini, because these are recommendations. Sanjida is going to talk about health consequences. Of course, early pregnancy is one way to keep the relationship, and then you face very high consequences for doing that. Just a recommendation before that on labor. Yeah. So around labor also, we are looking at new sites of where these relationships are being formed and how the girls are getting much more vulnerable into these relationships, trying to escape a very dangerous position from their home. And last, Mrinalini, recommendations, please. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we have to decriminalize non-exploitative, non-coercive, consensual sex between peers, and we have to also find ways to protect this young couples from the state and their own families and their own communities. I'll stop.
Thank you, Sejal. And I think very, very thoughtful and worrying concerns about the weaponization of law against young people, and the recent amendments that have happened now make statutory rape punishable by 20 years minimum, with no judicial discretion to reduce that sentence. So what we are seeing is the laws are one taking becoming very what we call strict liability laws. Once an event like this has occurred, there is no question of what the victim has to say, whether she sees herself as a victim or not. It is a grave offense. And the second little important shift that we are seeing in the laws is the judiciary no longer has the discretion to give a lower sentence. So it's a very worrying trend. And then to have child marriage laws, which will also take away the whole issue of these distinction between the various kinds of underage marriages and judicial discretion. That really means that you're moving very far away from protecting the rights of the child.
So just to give a brief context of CEHAT's work, CEHAT has more than 2 decades of engagement with the public health system to establish the intervention models to respond to violence against women. When I say intervention models, it entails training of the healthcare providers, producing evidence around that, and as well as providing direct crisis intervention services to women who reach these public hospitals. So, in this context, we come in contact with the young girls who reach public health facilities to access sexual and reproductive health services. So, just to answer Madhu's question, I would like to give examples of 2 kinds of cases which come to us in these public hospitals, and these kinds of the cases highlight how the social norms and the legal framework which governs the agency of the young girls pose a barrier to the access to the sexual and reproductive health, and it shows that there is a complete disregard of the agency body and the sexual and the reproductive health of the young girls as well as the mental health well-being. So the first kind of the cases is the elopement or the runaway cases. So elopement cases are those where the young girls who run away from their homes with their boyfriends with the purpose maybe to get married or may not to get married. And all these cases are below 18. And if you look at the profile of these cases, more than 75% of them are in the age group of 16 to 17. And the next question is that why these girls are brought to the hospital. So I can say that 99% of these girls are brought to the hospital by the police, because we have a law called POCSO, which is Protection of the Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012, which criminalizes any sexual activity under 18, even if it is consensual in nature. So these girls are brought to the hospital because their parents file a missing complaint, and then the girls are brought to the hospital to rule out sexual assault. And as I said, the majority of them are from 16 to 17 age group. And under what circumstances these girls decide to elope from the home? If you see, then the majority of the girls in their history given to the doctor, they say that there was a disapproval of the relationship from the parents. That's why they decided to elope. And the reasons for the disapproval, the majority of them are the opposition to the caste, class, and the religion of the boy. And then these girls are not left with any choice but to elope and with the boyfriend. And then sometimes they also end up getting married so as to gain the social acceptance back, because in India the sexual relationships are considered only in the context of the marriage. So as to avoid the labeling of bad girl, often these girls get married after eloping, and then the police find them and bring them to the hospital for the sexual examination. So now looking at the response of the public health system to such cases, the elopement cases, we have seen that under the POCSO, there is a legal obligation for the doctors to mandatory report to the police any case of the POCSO. So they have to report it to the police. So as I told, 99% of the cases are brought by police only. Even if there is a 1% case in which the girl has come along with her parents or a boyfriend to access sexual and reproductive health services, like mostly an unwanted pregnancy, then the usual response of the doctors is that complaint has to be registered with the police before providing abortion. This is a main barrier for these young girls to access the reproductive health services, because there is a fear that if the police will be involved, then the boyfriend will get prosecuted for the rape. So the legal framework poses a major barrier for the access to the SRHR services, and invariably the public health system makes it the access to the services conditional to make a complaint to the police. And then the other type of the cases that I want to speak about is the cases of the young girls who come to these hospitals
2
with
minutes.
the complaint of accidental consumption of poison. So I can say that every month there are around 20-22 cases of accidental consumption of poison of young girls which come to these hospitals. And when the counselors in the hospital, they spoke to these girls, they found that one of the major reason so these are basically attempted suicide cases, but within the hospital they are recorded as accidental consumption of poison cases. When these counselors spoke to these young girls, one of the major reasons for attempting suicide was found to be a disapproval of relationship by the parents, and invalidation of the choices of the young girls, and forcing them to marry to the persons with, of not their choice. So this is the major reason for attempted suicide among the young girls. And when we look at the response of the public health system, the these cases are recorded as accidental consumption of poison only. There are no efforts by the healthcare providers to seek the history from the young girls to know what are the underlying factors because of which they attempted suicide. And then not they don't even attempt to address the aftermath of attempting a suicide. It was just because the crisis intervention services are there, the trained counselors are there, they spoke to these girls and provided them services. So what I'm trying to highlight is that because of the deeply entrenched social norms and the legal framework that we have, which governs the sexual agency of these girls, the access to the SRHR services has been compromised, and invariably the girls are, they don't access this reproductive health services because they fear that if they will walk into a public hospital to access abortion for an unwanted pregnancy, they will fall into the criminal justice system, and then the boyfriends can be prosecuted for rape.
I should just say in full disclosure that my work on child marriage has been somewhat more recent. I've been doing research on a range of topics, and one of the topics that I have actually been working on for about 2 decades now is gender biased sex selection. And it is from there that I have, as it were, moved sideways to the issue of underage marriage. So the first thing that struck me, and this is a contrast I'm making with the kind of on-the-ground involvements that we have had on sex selection and sex-selective abortions and all the related issues, is that there has been whereas in the former, in thinking about the issues of the so-called missing girls in the language of one kind of language, mainstream language. There has been a positive relationship, I would like to say, between practices and campaigns on the issue and the knowledge that we have about that, whether it be macro or micro. And this is what I found to be absolutely lacking in this area. And some of that is, I think, even visible in all the presentations that we have seen, where we are seeing very dedicated levels of involvement for a long time. And now picking up pace, but in a kind of, how shall I say, a knowledge vacuum. And this knowledge vacuum is sometimes just very basic at the level of data beyond some very, very simple macro data from the census as well as from the National Family Health Survey. But even that is sometimes not even carried through to some kind of, so we don't have a sense of the larger story within which we can even place something like agency. In fact, I'm a little worried about the extent to which we are placing so much emphasis on the agency of adolescents, as though a very, very vulnerable group is somehow their choices are somehow supposed to become decisive here. So firstly, why does India have the largest numbers? It has the largest numbers because we are, after China, the largest country in the world in terms of population. And we are by far the largest when it comes to the proportion of rural and poor populations. So the fact that we then have these large numbers is not at all surprising. So I think that itself needs to be put in perspective, rather than this fact of our having these large numbers constantly being thrown at us, as it were. It's a byproduct of the kind of country that we are, the pattern of development that we have, the extent to which we are still a rural country, and the lack of development of large areas, large swathes of this country are indeed the underdeveloped regions that are in fact the so-called hotspots of child marriage. That's one. Secondly, there is this constant correlation exercise that is done between the prevalence of child marriage and indicators, mostly health indicators, such as stunting, thinness on the part of the mother, stunting on the part of the child, anemia on the part of the mother, and related sort of kinds of issues, mortality, maternal mortality. And of course, there is a positive correlation between higher ages at marriage and more positive indicators. But this is a completely misleading kind of correlation. Why? Because higher ages at marriage go hand in hand with higher standards of living, greater degrees of urbanization, wealth, and so on, indicators that then broadly correlate, therefore, with better health outcomes. So it's not the fact that, and this is where I have a real problem with certain, in fact, even well-regarded journal articles that are all practically saying that the cause of the malnourishment of our women and children is indeed the early age at marriage. That is absolutely false. Even more false would be the correlation between high maternal mortality rates and the age at marriage, because high maternal mortality rates are one of the most common reasons for high maternal mortality is the fact that there is excess bleeding at the time of childbirth due to anemia. And anemia bears zero, and I mean zero, correlation with age at marriage. A woman is no less anemic when she is 23 or 24 if she is in fact from a poor family where anemia is endemic. So we are looking at a lot of misleading correlations being created. Another one that is also an part of mainstream, I think, not necessarily in a CSW context, but certainly other contexts that I have seen, is indeed the correlation between age at marriage. It's an old issue, and fertility. And one of the more remarkable actually developments of the last 20 years has been a very interesting and significant drop in fertility, including in regions associated with very high prevalence rates like West Bengal and so on, have some of the lowest fertility rates, have gone below even replacement levels. And that never gets talked about. So I think we're looking at all of this, and side by side then we have major paradoxes that I would call paradoxes in the Indian story, where not only, as people have said, not only are the numbers relatively have reduced over the last 10, 15 years, whether you look at census, whether you look at NFHS, they have halved more or less by both, according to both, in the last 10, 20 years, but the rates have been declining. Age at marriage is creeping up. It has been steadily creeping up over the turn of the century into the 21st century. And side by side with that is one of the most paradoxical developments, which is to say, one is not paradoxical perhaps, which is increasing access to education. But the most paradoxical of them all is declining work participation rates. Declining proportions of our women are in fact finding jobs. So the deep paradox here then is that you may have more women working in whatever levels of drudgery, necessity, work that they don't have control over. I am not, there's no romanticizing of the nature of this work. But as you go higher, and as you get to more educated groups of women, fewer proportions of those women are actually in any kind of job. We have a largest proportion of housewives are in urban India, where ages at marriage are higher. So, so in other words, until and unless we recognize, and this word has been used by many in passing, I would say, rather than being used as a fulcrum, which is the compulsory nature of marriage in India. This compulsory structure, we are probably a unique country in the whole world in terms of the fact that it is no less compulsory than it was earlier, even as ages at marriage are going up. The compulsory nature has not changed. 98% of women usually marry for life. We have negligible rates of divorce. And so this has to be put into the picture. And within that, the fact that the vast proportion, we have been hearing stories of choice, but stories of choice remain few and far between. The vast majority are indeed marrying, often consensually, in relation to the choices being made by their families. Because in a context where a compulsory marriage, where work chances, and we heard this very, very poignantly from the very first speaker, where she spoke poignantly about what opportunities there were. If in fact a young woman cannot imagine any meaningful, even after an education, even after high school, or even after some skill development, cannot imagine any form of work that would give her some level of economic independence, then where is she going to get that security from? It's going to be from a marriage tie. And that marriage tie is being decided by family more often than not, unless she were to take the enormous risk of going with a possible love affair and then take that where it takes her. And in fact, I would even go further and say that in my own studies, there are romantic marriage relationships that suffer from lack of support and have to actually try and survive in the most hostile of conditions, and where therefore many young people make the more, how shall I say, pragmatic choice of not going where their heart leads them, but rather going where the family security, where there is a fallback option.
Please ask you to wrap up. Thanks.
Okay, where fallback option would in fact be provided by the natal home. I'll stop right there. Thanks.
Madhu, for organizing this important webinar and giving me the opportunity to present. So the proposal of raising the minimum age of marriage of girls in India to 21 years has triggered important conversations and reflections globally across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and in our membership. As all of us know, in the last decade or so, efforts were made to make sure that child marriage received separate attention within the framework of international law, and that it is recognized as a gender-based violence and a human rights violation. However, what we've also seen is international law instruments are creating confusion as they contradict one another, and they use the term child early and forced marriage interchangeably. International law also leans towards calling for state enforcement and action, whereas what we've been hearing and also in our experience, child marriage is a part of social and customary practice. Also in the Sustainable Development Goals, which was signed by countries in 2015, sets indicators around target 5.3 about child marriage by measuring the reduction in numbers of marriages. And also the high-level political forum, which is meeting every year, is reviewing progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we are observing is that many countries are focusing on age of marriage and consequently legal reforms to revise the minimum age of marriage, to address child marriage, and also looking only at numbers. Many countries have also passed multiple legislations to revise the minimum age of marriage, some from 16 to 18, but some have even raised it to 20, like of both boys and girls, like Nepal. However, what we can say from whatever we are, where we are working, and what we feel is that any proposal on reforming laws or passing new laws should be based on evidence and experience of how existing laws are being implemented and practiced in real context, and whether they are responding to the social issue rather than criminalizing young people, as all the panelists before me have pointed out so well. And also what we are increasingly realizing is that child early and forced marriage, instead of it being framed as a gender inequality issue and efforts directed towards addressing the root causes, which require transformational and sustained efforts, states are passing strict laws as solutions. Once these laws are passed, they remain more or less on paper and from what we have heard, and are used selectively. So there is actually little evidence to suggest that laws impact significantly on the practice. So instead of investing in education, social and health services, education, information and awareness raising and prevention of child marriage, many states are spending disproportionately higher amounts of public resources on complex and overburdened criminal justice systems. Some of our member organizations noted recently that states could do better if they're genuinely committed to reducing child marriage. It would be far more effective to invest in reducing economic inequalities and also preventing climate change, which is driving impoverished communities further into economic hardships and contributing to prioritization of boys over girls in education and also early marriage. Also, from our experience in India and South Asia, to reinforce what other panelists have expressed so well before me, we need to focus on improving both the quality and access of secondary education to ensure that girls complete schooling and do not drop out due to poverty and gender norms, forcing them to unpaid work or early marriage. That they're supported in the transition to higher education or employment opportunities with better access to health and nutrition. So active promotion of options other than child marriage and work towards breaking down patriarchal structures which control the sexuality and choice of women is the only way forward to ensure that girls are in a position to take decision about their lives. As a global partnership of civil society organizations, we are also committed to bringing voices and experiences around how laws are being implemented into learning and advocacy spaces at national, regional, and global level. And legal responses to child marriage or any revision of laws needs to be built in a participatory manner. The civil society organization and young girls are consulted to ensure that they are relevant to their needs. Our advocacy efforts going forward would be to shift the focus of state action from simply passing legislations to making investments into creating an enabling environment where girls and women can exercise their choice and agency. We also need to ensure that young women and girls benefit from human rights laws, and these are actually translating into something that helps them. And there is a guarantee for their rights for education, for employment opportunities, and also to live a life free from violence in both public and private spaces.
And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very important webinar on the child marriage issue, which is very important issue for the Committee on the Rights of the Child, of course. Madhu posed a question, but before directly responding to your question, let me start with sharing some thoughts. First of all, I haven't prepared any presentation. What I'm going to speak now is just a response to all the presentation I have heard, which are very, very informative and very useful. Learning about what is happening on the ground in India. I myself, I'm a member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, but at the same time, I am a lawyer, practicing lawyer in the area of family law for over 30 years in Japan. I have been always struggling about the use of law in the family law area. As a lawyer, but as also thinking about the effectiveness of law to achieve the purpose of what the law is aimed at. Today we are talking about the child marriage, but I just wanted to share a related issue, but not necessarily about the child marriage issue. In the family law area, there has been the discussion such as the use of criminal law or criminalization of the, as a sanction, for example, against the parental child abduction or failure to pay the child support. But what are the consequences of those laws? The purpose is the enforcement of certain norms, but who will get benefit and actually who will be more put in the more difficult situations? Very often the child. So I have been always thinking about the law is very often seen as a very strong tool to achieve certain norms, but at the same time, it will create some negative consequences, which I don't think that anybody wants to see. So when I came to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, I started thinking about the power of the law, because as you might be already very much aware that the Article 4 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child talks about the obligation of the state parties to implement the international standards, which are the rights of the child under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the obligation of the state parties are to undertake all appropriate legislative, administrative, and other measures. So in the first place, the committee very often talks about the need of the legal reform or enactment of new law. Secondly, if the law is already enacted or reformed, then we very often make recommendation to effectively implement or enforce such law. And secondly, policy recommendations such as National Action Plan or comprehensive policy guidelines. And thirdly, the awareness raising or training, all those measures. But we talk about the law in a very generic way or not without going into the details. So when it comes to the child marriage, the recommendations the committee very often make is to establish the minimum age of marriage, because sometimes the minimum age of marriage is not clearly provided. If it is under 18, our recommendations is always to raise the minimum age of the marriage to 18. If there are any exceptions allowed for the child marriage, we recommend to abolish such exceptions. But this is different from the punish the child marriage. And sometimes we use the word in the recommendations to abolish child marriage or prohibit the child marriage or eradicate the child marriage. But I checked our recommendations in the past 4 or 5 years, and I didn't find specific recommendations the committee has made. To my quick research, we do not usually recommend the state parties to punish the child marriage, but I have found some recommendation of our committee, which is when the state parties already criminalize child marriage, then the committee has recommended the state parties to effectively implement such law. So even within the legal legislative measures, there is a variety of what kind of law should be used to achieve the purpose to reduce or eradicate child marriage. It comes from just the establishing minimum age or raise the minimum age to the punish the child marriage as a criminal law. So why this trend exists to criminalize the child marriage? I think I don't have a clear answer, but I think in my view, there is over-reliance on the law and also over-reliance on the punishment or criminalization, thinking that this is the strongest way to enforce certain international human rights norms. I think we have to be very careful. Is that the way to achieve the purpose of the law? And also, very often the committee recommends the state parties to monitor the law after which is established. But even before establishing some law or enacting some law, our recommendation is always to have the child rights impact assessment. If the draft law or proposed law will actually achieve the purpose to promote or protect the children's rights or not, this kind of assessment is very much necessary. And we know the negative impact of criminalization, which comes into the area of children. because we very often, the children, although they are supposed to be the victims, but for example, the victims of sexual offenses or victims of trafficking, very often the children, the child victims are treated as if they are offenders rather than the victims. So those, all the consideration needs to be taken into account. And I also want to raise one point. Today, I heard two previous speakers mentioned about the child early and forced marriage. And I think the last speaker or the speaker before the last mentioned that these terms are very often used interchangeably and create the confusion. I think this is a very important point because the Committee on the Rights of the Child and the CEDAW Committee adopted the joint general recommendation and joint general comments. And in that general comments, we said that child marriage also referred to as early marriage. We also said that a child marriage is considered to be a form of forced marriage, given that one or both parties have not expressed full, free, and informed consent. So if the, I think we need to clarify what are the early marriage, because I understand in India, the proposed change to the child marriage law is to raise the minimum age of marriage even above 18. So does that mean that there is some standard when the marriage is early or not early? Or we talked about the consensual marriage or arranged marriage, but when the person has the capacities or maturity to have to provide a real consent. But I also heard today a lot, even if the children consent, adolescents give the consent, is that the real informed consent? Because it's not because of lacking of the maturity, but because there is no other options. So I think we need to think about all those aspects of what are the options for young adolescents and how we can empower them. And we talked also today about the maturity and how can we create enabling situations to empower them rather than confine them into the situation where they don't have the other choices. So those are the response in all. These are my thoughts which come to my mind in response to all the presentations today. But I fully agree with what Madhu said, that committee is talking about the evolving capacities, and in particular in 2016, the committee adopted the general comment on the rights of the adolescents. And so the child marriage issue is not only the harmful practice, which is the framework, the joint general recommendation and the joint general comments of the CEDAW and CRC address the child marriage as harmful practices. But we need to understand the child marriage not only from that perspective as harmful practices and violation or violence against children, but it's actually involves a lot of issues such as the age of sexual consent or the education or sexual and health rights. So this is the comprehensive understanding of the child marriage and the social pressure. So I think this presentation, this side event is so rich, and I learned a lot, and I'm really appreciate of all those very deepened understanding and the discussion about the child marriage. So thank you very much, and I hope if there is any questions, I'm happy to answer, but this is my sort of comments to all the presentation today. Thank you very much.
Entire panel discussion has actually been saying that structural changes or root causes need to be addressed through structural changes, and that law itself is not going to ensure that people are going to marry at 18. If somebody wants to jump in and answer this question, because there's often confusion between ideal age of marriage and minimum age of marriage. Yes, of course, I think everybody agrees 18 is too young, but should law even entertain the concept of an ideal age of marriage?
We have, I think, enough evidence to suggest that the law has not been an answer. It has not really been the factor responsible for increasing the age of marriage. And I had also mentioned that there were several attempts and efforts made by civil society organizations that have really actually been towards empowering children and young people, and that's worked more. Working with communities has brought better results than law and its punitive approach to child marriage as well as age of sexual consent. I've also tried to post a response in the chat box in this regard, sharing some experimentation where we try to use sports as a way of building confidence in girls, restoring their self-esteem, and bringing them to a position where they could negotiate on a lot of aspects with their families, within the community, including the issue of marriage. So we need to, widen our horizons to, take up initiatives that will actually make a difference in the lives of both girls and boys. And as I've also mentioned in the chat, that we need to engage with men and boys on the issue of gender-based violence, on issues of age of marriage, age of consent, etc. That's what I would say.
What we've seen come across in the presentations is also that underage marriages is occurring within contexts of poverty, where there are no opportunities. The middle class India is not married before the age of 18. So clearly there's a correlation between lack of opportunities, disadvantage, marginalization, and early marriage. So really, other interventions are necessary. And we do agree, marriage should be a choice, not a compulsion, whether at 18 or 25.
Because I understand that there is a young boys report. My question is whether the participants of these young boys reports include the children. I want to know if the children are also involved or consulted to produce these young boys reports.
तो मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि ये जो पूरा प्रोसेस है वो कई तरह की लड़कियों और लड़कों के साथ अलग-अलग जगहों पे किया गया, जिसमें गाँव, शहर, पढ़ने वाले, नहीं पढ़ने वाले, काम-काज करने वाले, ट्राइबल, नॉन ट्राइबल, तो बहुत डाइवर्स ग्रुप के साथ किया गया, जिसमें 16 से लेके 24 साल तक के लड़के-लड़कियाँ थे और न सिर्फ और अलग अलग स्टेट में किया गया, और सब लड़के लड़कियों ने बातचीतों की तरह से कुछ टूल्स और पेडागोजिकल इंटरवेंशन के तरीके से, कुछ लोगों ने मैपिंग किया, कुछ लोगों ने ऑडिट की, कुछ लोगों ने डिस्कशन किए, तो अलग अलग वेज से इन पे बात हुआ, और उस सबके बाद में ये रिपोर्ट का एक को इकट्ठा करते हुए जो उनकी समझ बनी, उसको हम उसको इस रिपोर्ट में कलेक्ट करके सबके सामने लाया गया।
We just thank everybody for making this time. Ms. Otani, especially you, it's quite late in the evening in Japan. Thank you, everybody, and we hope to continue this conversation alive. We are really invested in it. All the panelists here, I know, have very long-term commitment to the issue. So we would welcome any connections and engagement from those who are with us on this attending this event. Thank you.